"Don't send me home," whispered Marine vet to nurse, what 300 Hell's Angels did next. The hospital was quiet, almost too quiet for a place that usually never slept. The faint hum of machines and the occasional footsteps in the hallway were the only sounds breaking the silence. Outside, the city lights flickered in the night, and a cold wind blew past the empty streets. Inside, however, one room held a tension that no one else could feel. In that small hospital room, a Marine veteran lay on a narrow bed, his uniform replaced by a plain hospital gown, his body covered with bandages and bruises. Every movement he made was careful, almost hesitant, as if he feared that any sudden motion might cause pain or draw attention. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, stared at the ceiling, though they saw nothing. They were heavy eyes, burdened with memories that refused to let him rest, filled with shadows of experiences that had haunted him since he returned from the battlefield. A nurse, young but experienced, walked into the room carrying a clipboard. Her name was Sarah, and she had seen many patients come and go, but something about this Marine was different. She noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the way his jaw tightened when he moved slightly, and the subtle tension in his shoulders. These were small signs, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but to her they spoke volumes. There was a story here, one that went beyond the visible wounds, beyond the obvious cuts and bruises. This was a story of a man carrying invisible scars, scars that weighed heavier than any physical injury. The Marine finally turned his gaze to her, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't send me home," he said. The words were soft, but they carried a weight that made the nurse pause. It wasn't the kind of plea she heard every day, and it wasn't the kind of request that could be ignored. There was a desperation in his tone, a hint of fear, and perhaps even a hidden pain that words could not fully express. Sarah placed her hand gently on his arm, feeling the slight shake beneath her touch. "We're here to help you," she said softly, her voice steady and reassuring. "You're safe here, tell me what's going on." He looked away, his eyes scanning the shadows in the corner of the room. They don't understand. If I go home, I won't be safe," he murmured, his voice breaking just slightly. Sarah's heart tightened. She had encountered fear in many forms, panic attacks, anxiety, and the silent terror of those who had lived through war. But this was different. This was a fear rooted in real danger, one that she couldn't fully comprehend yet. She knelt slightly by the bed, keeping her voice calm and her expression patient. "You don't have to explain everything right now, but we need to know enough to keep you safe. Can you tell me who might be after you?" The Marine's hands gripped the edge of the blanket tightly. His breathing was shallow, and he seemed to struggle with each word. "It's not people you know, not ordinary people. They can't be reasoned with," he said. His eyes, dark and haunted, met hers briefly before darting away again. Sarah realized that he was talking about something far more serious than she had imagined. The quiet hospital room now felt like a fragile bubble, protecting him from the world outside, a world that seemed terrifying and unpredictable. Sarah understood that she had to act carefully. She couldn't just call in the authorities without knowing the full situation, and she couldn't force him to stay if he didn't want to. But she also knew that she couldn't ignore the urgency in his eyes, the way his body seemed to tense at every passing sound. She decided to create a space of trust, letting him feel that he could speak without fear of judgment. "You've seen things that most people can't even imagine," she said gently. "You've been through experiences that would shake anyone. I'm not here to judge, I'm here to help. Can you tell me a little more about what's happening?" The Marine took a deep, shaky breath, closing his eyes as if to gather strength. "I served overseas in a place where survival was the only rule. I thought I left all that behind, but—" His voice trailed off, and he swallowed hard. The nurse waited patiently, giving him the space he needed to continue. "Some people, some groups, they're not like anything you've heard about. They keep track of people, and when they decide, there's no arguing. I thought I was safe, I thought I could come home, but now—" His hands clenched, and his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and frustration. Sarah nodded slowly. She could see the weight of his words, the invisible burden he carried. "I understand," she said softly. "You feel like the danger followed you here. That must be terrifying." The Marine nodded, his expression tight. "It is, and if I go home, it's not just me. Others could be in danger too." The nurse realized that his plea, "Don't send me home," was not just about himself. It was about protecting people he cared about preventing harm from reaching those he loved. Hours passed in quiet conversation. Sarah listened as the Marine recounted stories of his deployment, carefully omitting sensitive details, yet enough to convey the gravity of his situation. He spoke of comrades lost, of missions that went wrong, and of encounters with people who operated outside the law, people who had their own rules and codes. Each story revealed a man who had faced extreme danger and had survived, but at a cost. He had returned home alive, but the shadows of his experiences lingered, and now the fear that he might not make it another day without help weighed heavily on him. The nurse noticed his hesitation when the topic turned to his past connections. There was a subtle shift in his tone, a quiet tension that spoke of alliances that others might not understand. Sarah understood that he trusted very few people, and those he did trust might be unconventional, perhaps even feared by society. Yet there was a thread of hope in his words, a faint belief that someone out there would act in his favor if they understood the situation. As night deepened, the hospital corridors grew emptier, the occasional nurse or orderly passing by like shadows in the dark. The Marine remained alert, his eyes scanning every sound, every movement outside the room. Sarah stayed with him as long as she could, offering water, adjusting blankets, and simply being a presence he could rely on. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the constant readiness to react to an unseen threat. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically, and yet he endured. In a quiet moment, the Marine spoke again, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if anyone else would help, if anyone else could, but you're listening." His words were simple, but they carried immense weight. Sarah felt a connection in that moment, a silent understanding between two people who shared a recognition of fear, loyalty, and humanity. She knew that the coming hours would be crucial, that every decision could matter. And she also knew that her role, as a nurse and as a human being, was to stand by him until he could be safe. Outside the hospital, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet storm that had gathered within one small room. But the Marine's warning, his whispered plea, "Don't send me home," had already set a series of events in motion, events that would soon reveal the lengths some people would go to protect a veteran in need. The nurse sensed this, though she could not yet see it clearly. She only knew that the man before her was not an ordinary patient, that his story was far from over, and that the world outside held dangers that demanded vigilance, courage, and an unexpected alliance that neither she nor the Marine could have anticipated. Hours turned into early morning. The Marine finally lay back, exhaustion taking over his tense frame, yet his eyes never fully closed, always half open, half alert. Sarah adjusted the covers one last time and gave him a gentle nod. "Rest if you can," she whispered. "We'll make sure you stay safe." The Marine's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile, a silent acknowledgement of her words. For the first time since his return, he felt a fragile sense of hope. It was small, but it was enough. As the first light of dawn touched the city, the hospital room remained a quiet sanctuary. Within it, a Marine veteran and a compassionate nurse shared a moment of understanding, a bond formed in the unlikeliest of circumstances. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. The Marine's whispered plea had not gone unheard, and the events set in motion by that simple sentence would soon reach far beyond the walls of the hospital, revealing courage, loyalty, and the power of people who would not abandon someone in need. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen yet present, a network of allies began to stir, ready to respond to the silent call of a Marine who had survived war but now faced another battle, closer to home and just as real. The morning light seeped slowly through the hospital blinds, casting long, soft shadows across the sterile room. The Marine veteran had spent a restless night, his eyes darting at every sound, every flicker of movement outside the window. The nurse, Sarah, had remained nearby as much as she could, offering quiet reassurances and careful observation. But the man's unease could not be soothed entirely by words or presence. There was something larger at play, something beyond the ordinary fears of a hospital stay, something dangerous that he could not explain completely. By mid-morning, whispers began circulating among the hospital staff. Nurses and orderlies spoke in hushed tones about the Marine's strange request not to be sent home. Some shook their heads, assuming he was simply traumatized from war. Others felt an unspoken tension, a danger that was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah could feel it too. Something about his posture, The way he scanned the room as if expecting someone to appear at the door told her that this was more than mere anxiety or post-traumatic stress. The Marine had tried to explain bits and pieces the night before, but the reality of the situation was complicated. He had made enemies overseas, yes, but he had also formed alliances with people who lived by a code different from ordinary law. People who understood loyalty, protection, and honor in ways most civilians could never imagine. And now, those alliances were becoming active again, moving quietly in the background to ensure that he remained safe. Sarah began to take notes discreetly, aware that the hospital records could not fully capture the danger he was in. She listened carefully as he spoke in fragments, often pausing to catch his breath or to steady his nerves. He told her about the groups he had encountered, people who moved in silence but whose presence was felt strongly by anyone who crossed their path. "They're organized, relentless," he said, his voice tight with tension. "And they know who I am, where I've been, and what I've seen. If they want me gone, it won't be a question. They'll just act." Sarah felt her heart beat faster. She had seen her share of emergency situations, but this was different. This wasn't a patient with a broken leg or a fever. This was a man at the center of something invisible yet palpable, a web of danger that stretched far beyond the hospital walls. She realized that the Marine's plea, "Don't send me home," was a matter of survival, not just fear. It was a desperate request for protection, and she had no idea just how far that protection would stretch. Hours passed, and the city outside continued unaware. Cars moved along the streets, people went about their daily routines, and children walked to school, oblivious to the silent storm gathering nearby. But shadows had begun to stir in ways that were not obvious to ordinary eyes. Motorcycles, hundreds of them, began to gather discreetly in garages, on the outskirts of the city, and in empty parking lots. Men in leather jackets checked their bikes, exchanged brief words, and prepared for something that would soon make itself known. It was not chaos, and it was not random. It was organized, precise, and purposeful. Back in the hospital, the Marine's anxiety continued to rise. He kept glancing at the clock, listening for sounds in the hallway and scanning the window. Sarah noticed that his breathing had grown shallow again. "We need to be smart," she said quietly. "You're not alone in this. If there's a way to make sure you're safe, we'll find it, but you have to tell me what you can." He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I have connections, people who understand. They're different from the law, they respect loyalty, and they act fast when someone is in danger. I've never needed them like this before, but I think I do now." His words were careful, almost secretive. Sarah realized that he was speaking of a group whose reputation alone could intimidate most people. They were known for their discipline, their loyalty, and their unspoken rules. And though many might fear them, their purpose in this case was clear. They were protectors, called upon to shield someone in immediate danger. Sarah's mind raced. She knew the hospital could not provide the kind of protection the Marine needed. Security could keep ordinary threats away, but this was something else entirely. And yet, she felt a strange sense of relief in knowing that allies existed, people who would respond to his silent plea, who understood him, and who would act without hesitation. The thought was both comforting and unsettling, because the very scale of their response could be overwhelming. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, small groups of motorcycles began to converge. Riders checked their maps, coordinated routes, and prepared for a journey that would stretch across the city. The sound of engines revving, faint at first, grew steadily, a low murmur that hinted at the approaching storm. There was an air of discipline among them. This was not a reckless ride. It was a mission, carefully planned, guided by codes of loyalty that outsiders could not understand. Inside the hospital room, the Marine remained alert. Every noise from the corridor made him tense. He occasionally peeked through the blinds, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening outside, though he could see little from the window. He muttered under his breath about the dangers that awaited if he left the hospital unprotected. Sarah stayed close, offering reassurance, but also realizing that the hours were critical. Every passing minute brought the outside world closer to an unknown confrontation, and yet the Marine had allies already mobilizing, invisible to all but him. As the morning stretched into afternoon, hospital staff began to notice unusual activity outside. A few people had seen groups of bikers gathering at distant corners, their motorcycles lined up in organized formations. but most dismissed it as routine riding or weekend preparation, not realizing that hundreds of individuals were preparing to act with purpose and speed. The Marine's face remained pale, tense, and unwavering, a silent witness to the growing movement beyond the walls. Sarah could feel his anxiety but also sensed a quiet determination. He was a man trained to survive, to endure extreme situations, and to act decisively when necessary. Now he had no choice but to rely on others, to trust in a network that had always respected his loyalty and his courage. "They'll come," he murmured. "They'll make sure I'm safe." There was hope in his voice, but it was tempered by the reality of danger. Hours passed with intermittent visits from doctors and nurses, all unaware of the true stakes. The Marine remained under observation, but his mind was elsewhere, aware of every sound, every shadow, every sign that indicated movement outside. He recounted fragments of his past missions, carefully avoiding sensitive details, yet providing enough context for Sarah to understand the seriousness of his situation. He spoke of people he had met in foreign lands, people who had codes of honor different from the ordinary world, people who understood loyalty in a way that transcended conventional law. By late afternoon, the rumble of engines grew louder. Sarah caught the sound first, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled through the floor. The Marine's eyes widened and he leaned slightly forward, listening intently. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice tight with anticipation. He explained that this was not a show of aggression but a demonstration of protection, a movement of people who had chosen to respond to his silent plea. Their loyalty was unspoken, their purpose clear, to ensure that he could leave the hospital safely without harm. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. A man who had served his country, who had endured unimaginable hardships, was now being protected by an unlikely alliance. The world outside was unaware, yet a carefully coordinated group was mobilizing to act as his shield. The hospital, with all its rules and regulations, could not compare to the commitment of these individuals. And though the Marine remained tense, there was a glimmer of relief in his eyes, a recognition that he would not face the danger alone. As the sun began to set, the city streets outside began to quiet down. Ordinary citizens went about their routines, oblivious to the growing force moving in silence. Inside the hospital room, the Marine prepared himself, checking his wounds, ensuring that he was ready for the unknown journey ahead. Sarah remained by his side, offering calm words, steady hands, and reassurance. She understood that the coming hours would test courage, loyalty, and trust in ways that few could comprehend. Finally, the rumble outside became unmistakable, a growing, organized sound of hundreds of motorcycles moving in unison, a force of protection unlike anything the Marine had anticipated. He felt a mix of relief, awe, and cautious optimism. The people coming to his aid were not ordinary friends, not ordinary allies. They were individuals who understood loyalty, danger, and honor in a way that transcended fear. Sarah watched as he prepared to face the next steps, realizing that his plea, "Don't send me home," had set in motion an extraordinary chain of events. Allies were moving closer, ready to ensure his safety, ready to act on a silent signal of trust and respect. And as the shadows lengthened across the hospital walls, the Marine and the nurse waited together, aware that the next hours would be decisive, that outside forces were converging, and that the world, as they knew it, was about to reveal a scale of loyalty and protection that few could imagine. The city streets were quiet in the early evening, yet an unusual energy pulsed through the air. It began as a low rumble, faint at first, almost imperceptible like distant thunder. But soon the sound grew louder, deeper, and impossible to ignore. The Marine veteran, still in his hospital bed, stiffened as the vibrations traveled through the floor. He knew the sound well. It was not a storm, nor was it ordinary traffic. It was the unmistakable roar of hundreds of motorcycles moving in unison. His eyes widened, a mixture of relief and awe crossing his face. He had called on allies, but he had never imagined the scale of the response. The rumble grew louder by the minute, echoing through the empty city streets as the bikers gathered in formation. Outside, engines hummed and roared, headlights flashing in careful, coordinated patterns, cutting through the early darkness. These were no reckless riders. This was an organized force, disciplined and united by a single purpose, to protect him. The nurse, Sarah, glanced out the window, her heart racing. She had seen her share of unusual events in the hospital, but this was extraordinary. Hundreds of motorcycles, moving like a single entity, were forming a convoy that would stretch for blocks. She could see the leather jackets, the badges, and the helmets reflecting the fading sunlight. The coordination was impressive. Every rider moved with precision, every engine timed in a symphony of protection. Sarah realized that this was not aggression. It was a protective mission, an unspoken promise of loyalty to someone who had earned it. The Marine felt a tight knot of emotions in his chest. He was used to relying on his own strength, his training, and his experience to survive. But now he had no choice but to trust these allies, men who operated by a different code, men who understood loyalty, protection, and honor in ways that were almost impossible to explain. "They're here for me," he whispered to Sarah, his voice a mix of wonder and cautious optimism. "They'll make sure I'm safe." The sound outside grew steadily, a rolling wave of engines that seemed to shake the very air. From distant corners of the city, more motorcycles joined the convoy. Riders adjusted their formation, signaling to one another with subtle gestures, ensuring that their movement remained organized, disciplined, and effective. These were experienced riders, individuals who had faced danger before and who understood that precision and planning were the keys to success. Sarah watched as the Marine prepared himself. He moved carefully, his body still stiff from injuries but his eyes sharp and alert. He checked the bandages, adjusted his clothing, and kept glancing at the window, reading every sign of movement outside. "It's impressive," Sarah said quietly, trying to calm the tension she felt rising in her chest. "I've never seen anything like this." The Marine managed a faint smile, his lips tightening as if to acknowledge her words. "Neither have I," he admitted, "but it's exactly what I needed." As the convoy of motorcycles approached, the city streets seemed to come alive with the sound and energy of hundreds of riders moving as one. The bikers formed a protective perimeter around the Marine's hospital, coordinating with a level of precision that few could imagine. Some stationed themselves near street corners, watching entrances and exits, while others remained close to the building, engines idling, ready to move at a moment's notice. It was a silent show of force, but one that carried an unmistakable message. The Marine was under protection, and no harm would reach him while they were present. Inside the hospital, the Marine felt a strange sense of reassurance. He had survived countless battles overseas, faced danger in ways most people could never imagine, yet he had never felt this combination of fear and relief. The bikers outside were not soldiers, not law enforcement, yet they were a force of protection as formidable as any army. He understood their code, their loyalty, and their purpose. This was not chaos. This was a disciplined response, a manifestation of trust and brotherhood that transcended ordinary rules. Sarah continued to watch, her concern mixed with awe. She knew that the presence of hundreds of bikers outside could be intimidating to anyone else, yet she could see the Marines' relief. The convoy was not here to threaten. They were here to safeguard, to ensure that a man who had served his country and faced danger abroad would not face new threats alone. She realized that sometimes protection came from unexpected places, and loyalty could take forms that ordinary people might never understand. The bikers remained alert and organized. They communicated with subtle signals, nods, and hand gestures, ensuring that everyone maintained formation and readiness. Engines purred like a controlled storm, and the convoy slowly began to move, not recklessly, but with purpose. They navigated the streets with care, moving closer to the hospital, ensuring that all routes were covered, all entrances monitored. Every rider knew the plan, and every rider understood the stakes. Inside, the Marine's pulse quickened. The sound of engines was no longer a distant rumble. It was a living presence, a force that had come alive to protect him. He felt the weight of gratitude, mixed with awe at the sheer scale of the effort. He had called on allies, but the response was beyond what he could have imagined. Hundreds of people, strangers to most but bound by loyalty to him, had mobilized to ensure his safety. It was both humbling and empowering. Sarah could see the change in him. His shoulders, which had been tense and guarded, now relaxed slightly. His eyes, which had been sharp with alertness, softened with recognition and relief. For the first time in hours, perhaps days, he allowed himself to believe that he would be safe. The bikers outside were a shield, a moving wall of protection, ready to respond to any threat, and he was at the center of it. As the convoy moved, the city seemed to bend to their presence. People in passing cars slowed to watch, pedestrians paused in curiosity, and the hum of the engines filled the streets with a sense of power and unity. This was not intimidation. It was a demonstration of loyalty, discipline, and unwavering commitment. Each rider understood that their purpose was clear: protect the Marine at all costs. And in the Marine's hospital room, he felt the reassurance of that commitment, a quiet promise that he would not face danger alone. Hours passed, and the convoy continued to hold its position. The Marine stayed alert but calmer than before, relying on the presence of his allies to maintain vigilance. He spoke occasionally to Sarah, explaining fragments of his past experiences, the connections he had made, and the reasons why this group had come to his aid. He spoke in careful, measured words, revealing only what was necessary, but each sentence conveyed the depth of trust and respect between him and those who had answered his call. Sarah listened, fascinated and moved by the unfolding events. She had witnessed heroism before, but this was different. This was an unusual form of courage, one that did not rely on weapons or authority, but on loyalty, discipline, and the willingness to act decisively for someone in need. She understood that the Marine had not only survived battles overseas, but he had earned a type of respect and protection that most people could not imagine. As evening turned to night, the convoy maintained its vigil. The bikers' presence was a quiet but formidable force, a moving barrier that ensured the Marine's safety. Inside the hospital room, he began to relax further, allowing himself moments of reflection and gratitude. He realized that he was not alone, that people he trusted, people bound by codes of loyalty and honor, had responded to his silent plea. And for the first time since returning from deployment, he felt a fragile sense of security, a recognition that he could face the next challenges with support. Sarah remained by his side, aware of the extraordinary circumstances. She knew that the night ahead would be crucial, but she also recognized that the Marine had allies whose presence changed the balance entirely. The bikers outside were more than just men on motorcycles. They were a manifestation of loyalty, of protection, and of human connection that transcended ordinary understanding. And as the night deepened, the Marine allowed himself to hope that the danger he had feared might be mitigated, at least for now, by the overwhelming presence of his protectors. The rumble of motorcycles continued into the night, a steady, reassuring sound that filled the city with a quiet energy. It was a living force, a collective heartbeat of loyalty and protection, moving in synchrony, prepared to act if the Marine was ever threatened. He lay back in his bed, his body tense no longer, his mind alert but calmer, and his heart filled with gratitude for the extraordinary allies who had come to his aid. Sarah watched him, reflecting on the events of the day. She had witnessed courage, loyalty, and an unusual form of heroism. The Marine's whispered plea, "Don't send me home," had set in motion an extraordinary response, and now, in the quiet of the hospital night, she understood the scale of what had been happening outside. Hundreds of individuals had mobilized to ensure the safety of a single man, bound not by obligation, but by respect, honor, and unwavering loyalty. As midnight approached, the Marine finally allowed himself to rest, his body and mind temporarily at ease. The convoy remained outside, a quiet but formidable presence, ensuring that the night passed without incident. And in that quiet moment, the Marine understood something profound. True loyalty was rare, but when it existed, it could create a shield stronger than any weapon, more enduring than any fortification, and more powerful than fear itself. The night had passed, and the first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The city was slowly waking, unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded under the cover of darkness. Inside the hospital, the Marine veteran finally allowed himself a deeper rest, though his body remained tense with the remnants of fear and exhaustion. The night had been long, filled with uncertainty and anticipation, but now, thanks to the overwhelming presence of allies outside, he had survived what could have been a critical moment in his life. The rumble of motorcycles had faded as the convoy gradually dispersed. One by one, the riders departed, leaving behind only the faint echo of engines and the reassuring knowledge that the Marine was now safe. These men and women had acted without fanfare, without recognition, moving in silence and discipline to protect someone they barely knew, but had chosen to defend out of loyalty and honor. The Marine had watched them leave, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and quiet respect filling his heart. He realized the magnitude of their support, understanding that this was not a casual gesture but a profound act of brotherhood and protection. Sarah, the nurse, stood by his bedside, observing him with a careful but gentle eye. She had stayed with him through the night, offering quiet words, support, and reassurance. Now, as the room brightened with the morning light, she saw a change in him. The tension that had gripped his body had loosened slightly, and his eyes, once sharp with fear, now held a softer glow. There was still wariness, of course. He had learned long ago that danger could appear without warning, but there was also a fragile sense of peace, a recognition that he had allies who would stand by him. The Marine spoke softly, almost to himself. "I never thought I'd see this, not here, not like this." He paused, thinking back on the events of the previous day and night. "I've faced danger in foreign lands, I've fought to survive, but this was different. I didn't even know if I would get help here at home." His voice carried both relief and wonder. Sarah listened, sensing the depth of his emotions. She understood that his gratitude extended far beyond the surface level. This was a man who had endured unimaginable hardships, who had learned to rely on himself, and now he was experiencing the rare and profound relief of being protected by others who understood loyalty in a way that transcended ordinary understanding. As the morning progressed, the Marine shared more of his story with Sarah. He spoke carefully, leaving out sensitive details but revealing enough to convey the gravity of his experiences. He recounted battles, missions, and moments when survival had seemed impossible. He spoke of connections he had made with people who lived by their own code, people who respected loyalty and honor above all else. And now, those connections had become tangible, moving in silence to ensure his safety when he had no other means of protection. Sarah could feel the weight of his experiences. She realized that while hospitals could treat physical wounds, they could not heal the invisible scars that war left behind. She also understood that healing required trust, support, and sometimes the intervention of those who could protect in ways the ordinary world could not. The Marine's eyes, once clouded with fear, now held a hint of hope, a recognition that he was not alone, that the world contained people willing to act decisively to safeguard others, and that trust, even in unusual forms, could make a difference. Outside the hospital, the city had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Cars moved along the streets, pedestrians hurried past, and the sounds of daily life resumed. Yet in the quiet corners, the bikers who had formed the convoy remained alert long enough to ensure that no immediate threat reached the Marine. They dispersed in a coordinated manner, leaving behind only the impression of order, discipline, and quiet protection. Their mission had been accomplished without fanfare or recognition, a testament to their commitment and the seriousness with which they approached loyalty. The Marine took a deep breath, allowing himself a moment to reflect. He had survived not just because of his own strength, but because of the combined efforts of people who understood the meaning of protection, friendship, and honor. He realized that he had been part of a rare and extraordinary moment, one that few could comprehend, but one that would stay with him forever. The knowledge that others had come to his aid, risking their own comfort and safety, filled him with a sense of gratitude that was difficult to express in words. Sarah observed him carefully, noticing the subtle changes in his demeanor. The tension in his shoulders had eased, the sharpness in his eyes had softened, and there was a quiet sense of relief in his posture. She understood that while the night had been intense and dangerous, it had also been transformative. The Marine had experienced the power of human loyalty, the depth of commitment that could emerge in unexpected ways, and the comfort of knowing that he was not alone in facing life's challenges. As the day progressed, the Marine began to prepare for the next steps in his life. He knew that his journey toward full recovery would not be easy. The physical injuries would heal over time, but the emotional and psychological scars required patience, care, and support. He also knew that the events of the previous night had shown him the importance of trust, of forming connections with those who could provide protection and guidance when danger arose. Sarah assisted him as he gathered his belongings, checking bandages, ensuring comfort, and offering guidance for the next stages of his recovery. She spoke quietly, encouraging him to take each step carefully, to rely on support, and to continue building trust with those who had proven their loyalty. The Marine nodded, absorbing her words, understanding that his survival depended not only on physical strength, but on the willingness to accept help, guidance, and protection when needed. Outside the hospital, the city carried on. The morning light revealed streets filled with activity, but for the Marine, the memory of the convoy remained vivid. Hundreds of motorcycles, moving as one, had formed a protective shield around him. Their discipline, coordination, and commitment had ensured his safety, demonstrating the extraordinary power of loyalty and human connection. He knew that he would never forget the sight, the sound, and the feeling of that protection, a reminder that courage and honor could exist in unexpected forms. As he stepped out of the hospital, supported by Sarah and mindful of his injuries, the Marine felt a renewed sense of purpose. The city stretched before him, filled with ordinary people going about their daily lives, unaware of the extraordinary events that had taken place. He understood that his life had been saved not just by his own strength, but by the willingness of others to act decisively, guided by loyalty, respect, and a code that demanded protection for those in need. He paused for a moment, taking in the morning air, feeling the sun's warmth on his face. There was a sense of calm, tempered by the knowledge that life could be unpredictable, but also a sense of hope, strengthened by the extraordinary demonstration of commitment he had witnessed. The Marine realized that his journey was far from over, but he also understood that he was no longer alone. Allies existed, ready to respond when necessary, and the bonds of loyalty he had relied upon were real, tangible, and powerful. Sarah smiled softly, recognizing the change in him. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, yet he had emerged with a deeper understanding of trust and human connection. She felt proud to have been part of his journey, to have witnessed the extraordinary events that had unfolded, and to have seen a man who had endured so much begin to find a sense of safety, hope, and courage once again. As the Marine made his way to a safer location, away from immediate danger, he reflected on the lessons he had learned. Courage was not only about facing danger alone. It was also about knowing when to rely on others, to trust in loyalty, and to accept protection from unexpected sources. The bikers, the convoy, the disciplined force that had come to his aid, represented a form of humanity that transcended ordinary understanding. Their actions had saved him, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, providing a rare and profound sense of security. In the days that followed, the Marine began to rebuild his life. He remained in contact with Sarah, the nurse who had listened, cared, and supported him through the most intense hours of his life. He also maintained a respectful distance from the bikers who had protected him, understanding that their assistance was rooted in loyalty, discipline, and their own code of honor. He felt gratitude, admiration, and a sense of humility for the extraordinary efforts that had ensured his safety. Through reflection and recovery, the Marine realized that the events of that night had changed him. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, yet he had also experienced loyalty, courage, and protection in ways that few could imagine. He had learned that human connections, trust, and honor could exist even in unexpected places, and that sometimes the most profound assistance came from those who operated outside ordinary rules. As weeks turned into months, the Marine's physical and emotional wounds began to heal. He carried with him the memory of the convoy, the sound of engines, the discipline, and the unwavering loyalty of those who had acted to protect him. He also carried with him gratitude for Sarah, who had remained steadfast and compassionate, helping him navigate both the hospital and the emotional challenges he faced. Together, these experiences became a foundation for his continued recovery and personal growth. Looking back, the Marine understood that the whispered plea, "Don't send me home," had set in motion events that would forever shape his life. It had brought allies into action, highlighted the extraordinary power of loyalty, and reminded him that courage was not always about facing danger alone. Sometimes, true courage involved recognizing the value of trust, the strength of human connection, and the importance of accepting help when it was offered. And so, as he continued his journey, the Marine carried with him the lessons of that extraordinary night. He had survived not only because of his own resilience, but because of the unwavering loyalty of others, the quiet discipline of those who protected him, and the compassion of those who listened when he reached out. His life had been forever changed, and he faced the future with a newfound sense of hope, gratitude, and understanding of the extraordinary power of human loyalty and protection.